Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus. This is because Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy.
Advanced philosophy memes. We make good memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes. Advanced philosophy memes. We make good memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes. Shoutouts to Andreas, Deacon, my boy Scott, Pedro, and everyone else that engages on my posts. And Sarah, keep it up, man. You'll get there someday. And everyone else, great memes. Philosophy memes. Advanced philosophy memes. Base fucking memes.
We really got to cash in on advanced philosophy memes more. I mean, are you guys even in that group? I feel like Will is. Will, you're part of APM, right?
Based, advanced.
Stefan, are you in advanced philosophy memes?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, APM could stand for anything. It could be for like Precambrian Mormonism. It could be for like artificial Precambrian Mormonism.
Huh.
Right? Or the P could be for polygamy. It could be for anything. Point is, APM it's like, why do kids like Apple Jacks when they don't taste like apples? Why do kids like advanced philosophy memes when they don't taste like advanced philosophy memes? They just do, okay? It's a pretty fun group. Some people get upset about the inclusivity of the group.
Yeah, see, I feel like it's one thing to seek out things and find sources of memes that are funny, but to find things that feel forbidden to even joke about and put them in the forefront and then have a discussion about why it offends one's sensibilities to joke about such things, I think is more important than just consuming memes off the internet as an individual.
Well, you guys know me like a little better than some people, like, because I do like Tartary Nova and I do this and that, but like there's a lot of people that just know one flavor of me. So there's some people that know that I'm super into Tartaria. They kind of have figured out I'm into other things, but the APM group, I think, are so divorced from the Tartaria group. You know what I mean? They're like completely different people. And I'm trying to like kind of bridge it together, but some people just are one side or the other side. And so I'll get these messages a lot in APM as an administrator where they say, did you know that this person's in the group? Like, did you know that there's like a serious communist or a serious white supremacist? Or I'm like, yeah, did you know there's like a trans person? And there's like, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of people. There's like 10,000 people in the group.
Well,
and they're
I've asked you that before because there was a couple of times where I put up memes and I could have sworn I was talking to the CIA in that group.
exactly all kinds of people in that group.
Well, you should be honored. Usually it's just bots that are talking back, but Andreas actually has the real deal, you know?
Yeah.
But I never thought about it. And I immediately hit Andreas and I was like, can we trust everybody in this group? And he's like, of course not.
Shouldn't that be your basic operating principle when you're online, though, is pretty much trust nobody. But
Right.
Yeah,
which is why I'm proud of the friendship I've managed to forge here with Andreas. So
we have other groups that are all about trust, and they're like very small groups. So you can trust people as far as you can throw them. like Kitchen Sink is a great group. It used to have thousands of members.
I mean,
But they decided to remove all the
it's not a
It's
great
actually called Kitchen Sink.
but
Well,
it's
we're just talking about the lore. This is really just lore at this point. We're just like, these are actually like BBS board Facebook group lore. How nerdy?
I mean, I've heard of Trustafarians before. Have you heard of that? No.
Oh God, yeah.
Trustafari. What is Trustafari?
It's just like they have Abercrombie and Alexis, but they have really nice dreads.
It's related to affluenza. You've heard of affluenza?
Oh, it's white boy dread stuff. Is that?
Yeah, I cut them off about a decade ago. I'm thinking about reattaching them though, because I think it's a really racist thing that white people can't have extensions. You know?
I agree.
I can't even find someone to do them for me. I haven't
Speaking
looked too hard.
Speaking of beautiful men, so Kurt here is the creator of the Advanced Philosophy Meme song, which we just played. He's also a longtime moderator, expert, and administrator of the Advanced Philosophy Memes group. So he kind of knows what's going on. That's also why he looks kind of withered, because he's seen a lot, you know?
What's up, homie?
Good to see you.
Well, I was going to ask you a few questions really quick. I know, like, because Kurt's not actually going to be here for very long, I think, unless you can, which is awesome. But I know you're always busy all the time, and you're a cave guide. You're a cave guide now all the time, guiding people in caves.
I do that. I typically go through the motions with a lot of different jobs. Like right now, part of going through the motions is this is my second year here, and they also have a wildlife park. And well, admittedly, I don't like doing the wildlife as much as the cave. So I feel like I kind of get bullied into doing it like every day. So I'm like, it's like this cycle where I feel like I'm doing myself a favor if instead of just trying to put up with stuff, wait until like jobs give you more and more responsibilities. And then after about 2 years, you're like, okay, I'm going to go get a pay raise somewhere else. Bye-bye. So like I'm on my third cycle of doing that. So it's like, it's effective. It's the most, I highly recommend that strategy if you.
My only concern, like, so there's a couple of things there. Like, one, the other day, people were lamenting we didn't have Louis C.K. anymore. And I was kind of like a Soviet Bosnian mother. Like, we have Louis C.K. at home. And I pointed at you, you know, like, you're my, you fulfill that need for me. But the other thing is, like, you can't just be constantly saying you're going to pick gum off the bottom of tables and not doing it, Kurt. That's not, somebody's going to have to pick the gum off the bottom of those tables, just like those kids are going to have to put the gum on the bottom of the tables for people to pick. It doesn't have to be you, but if you're gonna do anything, like if you're gonna lie about it, at least write a book. That's all I'm saying. Like, if you
find a hill to go out on, you got to like stomp your feet about them not giving you a pay raise and let them understand that there's a sunk cost in training an employee and that it's their job to now.
Do you have any idea how many times I've been in traumatic circumstances and thought to myself, like, this is gonna make a great story. This will make a great book. This will make a great movie. Like, anytime you're living a life you don't like, just remember that this is all part of the chapter you're working on that part of your life.
Well, how about my name, the biggest poser? It's one letter away from a very popular television show, right? And
exactly.
I feel like as far as having ideas in the blue, that
I totally missed that. Which show were we talking about? Biggest poster? Biggest poser? What?
Biggest loser. So it has to do with weight loss and health.
Oh,
how many? You could have a reality show where eventually even celebrities are doing yoga and showing how awkward it is to learn, but then I follow them through the arc, not just losing weight, but then actually gaining.
I have a zany comedy idea about The Biggest Poser, and basically it's like you get people that don't understand yoga. It's like, have you ever seen Bad Golf My Way? So like people who suck at golf but want to learn golf, and what they do is they get this golf coach who teaches them how to not do golf. They're like, do golf your own way. That's that movie, but with yoga, teaching people yoga, while also the idea of yoga is you're supposed to calm people down. So there should be like a Mike Myers thing where he's constantly revving people up and they're just like so ready to be calmed down because they're so at their limits. But the other thing I was going to say is, Kurt, do you know who Eeyore Bach is? We talked about the Bach saga a bazillion times. You're probably familiar with the Bach saga at this point.
No, just Johann Sebastian Bach.
Nope. This is a whole different kind of Bach music, actually. I'll just tell you for a second. Eeyore Bach, man. Thor, Holder, Devlin, Eeyore Bach. So basically what happened was there was this naked tour guide. He's not always naked, but he lived in, was it Finland, right? You know, and he's Iceland. Is that right? Finnish. He's Finnish. And he ended up working as a tour guide. And what he did was just make up stuff. I mean, this is one side of the story. Another side might say he literally knew.
I've been there.
universe, you know? Yeah, but he's like, this was in Iceland. They call it Iceland and Helsinki because this was the warmest place during the Ice Age. So Helsinki was where we were, you know, it's like this perfect land to survive. How good was it? The best. How long was it the best? For like ever. 50 million years of people just loving each other in death metal Helsinki. And like goats have children with donkeys. Was it with goats and apes make a man? Like there's a whole bunch of weird breeding stuff that's very metal. But the point is, after he left, he was able to write his own book, The Bach Saga, become famous, have people take care of him until he died of drugs and suicide or assisted suicide or, you know, murder. So you could be like Eeyore Bach. You know, all you have to do is be a lighting technician, an actor, and a tour guide and make up stuff. And you could probably be the greatest, you know, tour guide that there ever was, right? Because they're always going to want to come back to you for your tour.
I don't know, man.
You don't think so, Will? You don't want a crazy tour guide? Tell me about your trade.
Well, what it depends. What cave network are we talking here?
That's true. It's like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh caves, right?
We're right in a place called Center County. It's nothing major. So the biggest caves in the world are actually Mammoth Caves. They're in Kentucky. Right. A lot of cave networks there. And when you get into Pennsylvania, like we don't really have like huge caves or have any records. So it's not a network. It's just some like, I'll say Joe Schmo cave that's about a quarter mile long. It just the thing that makes it, I guess, a little bit different is there's not a lot of cave tours that you do by boat. So that's one of the few in the country that you do by boat. So that one's a little bit interesting and fun that way.
Is there any like specific, because we're talking about water and everything, is there any like shut off species that are only inside the cave?
Not really. Like there's a lot of we have like native trout and stuff. There's not much. There will be like little brown bats and big brown bats that come inside the cave to mostly hibernate during the winter because caves maintain temperature very well. So you'll get a lot of hibernation in the north in those caves. So yeah, part of the job is just like repeating a lot of educational stuff. And so I think that is good karma, like being very honest about like some educational stuff. Here's some rocks. Here's why the past existed, 5 million years ago, I think that part is good and it is important for people to learn. And, but honestly, like sometimes the more boring I try to make a tour, the better people enjoy it. So that it's a weird dynamic there.
I think both Andreas and I have been on a spelunking tour of sorts within the past 5 years, and it was separately. I think I did it a few months before he did, but in Bermuda, they've got
that's right,
underground cave systems that connect to the ocean via underground tubes, and you can scuba dive during certain times of day and certain times of year where the currents aren't so strong underground that people don't come out the other side, so to speak.
My experience would only be slightly cooler than Stefan's, and only because Brittany was there, and only because Brittany fell on the stalactite right after they said don't touch the stalactite. And it was just like too good because they couldn't do anything about it. Like she's like, oh well, woohoo, and like just lands on it. And so from there we have to like get like doctor or like medical people, and they're like, no one's fallen this cave in like 4 or 10 years, And so we have like old, out of date like medical stuff, but it's probably fine. Just like old band-aids and old stuff like that. And she's got like a piece of stalactite in her shoulder. Like, and Will, you read comic books, so what do you think a piece of like magical stalagmite or stalactite from Bermuda, like Atlantis, in your shoulder, like, Spider-Man, what is Atlantis? Right. You see where I'm going with this.
It's yeah. So there's got to be something to that, right? That's how it usually happens, man. Stalactite from Bermuda in the shoulder, and who knows? Maybe you can just
really bad, bro. Every time superheroes, yeah.
I don't know what that would give you though. Patience.
It corrects for mineral deficiencies. It's like how in the old school days they used to put iron in the tattoos over your veins if you were anemic.
You'll never have to take another vitamin.
The thing that also bothers me is like all of the good stories are all the same. So they're in Bermuda and they're like, we found this cave, right? Well, we didn't find this cave. Like 4 boys playing.
We're chasing a rabbit and
4 foundling boys. Yeah, exactly. these lost orphans were, they found their way into this, and then you look and you're just like, what is this place? Because it looks like, turquoise waters underground. There's all sorts of formations of calcium deposits, which make these cool pools. There's geysers, which make, certain colored areas where everything's coated in red or pink or green and just super shiny. And so it looks like paradise completely.
Yeah, what, there be dragons? Is that a meme of some sort? I figure if there was a realm where the axolotl has grown to like 500 times its normal size and is living somewhere.
What do you think about
Probably
that? Like,
there.
so I remember that movie that everyone hated, Reign of Fire, and I know that. Like, and
Oh,
by
that
the
movie's
way,
great.
we can talk about other things, but I love that movie, and Will, you do too. It sounds like, which is great. You guys remember this one? It's about dragons. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it stars what's his face? Mike all right.
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey, and then the other guy who plays Batman, Christian Bale.
No
So
way. Really?
Yes. It is an artifact from the past, bro. People don't make 100,000 movies about dragons starring Christian Bale anymore.
Yeah. Dude, Kurt, you had your hand up, at your heart. What were you trying to say?
I remember just like right at the end of the movie, this guy like just free dives with an axe like at a dragon.
Yeah. Which is now a major part of every AAA video game experience, right? Like that's God of War Ragnarok. So they that comes full circle. But the idea of the beginning of that movie is that they're telling children the Star Wars saga, and he's like making it up with puppets in his hands and stuff, because the most important story that you could tell children now is like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Like it becomes like so important. What do you think though about like the thing that people hated? I remember when that movie came out, they're like, this is so ridiculous, the idea that dragons would lay asleep for 1,000 years.
Then 10 years later, Game of Thrones happens.
I mean, it's literally biblical. What do you think about this idea, though? Like, there are animals that, we've seen in the wintertime, certain kinds of fish will freeze in the ice. Certain kinds, right? Not all of them, but there's certain kinds that can. And then they might be frozen for 5-10 years. If there was like a permafrost, there have been fish that were frozen for thousands of years, certain kinds of fish that can survive that. That's pretty impressive. So the idea that a dragon or some sort of an insectoid or these things that we don't completely understand, like when we say a dragon, is it necessarily a reptile or whatever? Just the idea of some sort of life that could hibernate indefinitely.
Well, see, this is funny because we were just talking about the cave systems, right? And I remember going through a cave in Tennessee where they specifically had a style or some species of fish that wasn't found anywhere else. And it was like blind because it had adapted to the cave. It had no pigment. It was wild. It was crazy. Like it was a totally different fish because it had a completely different set of evolutionary issues.
Right.
But I imagine that I mean, that's like, okay, so we're basically talking about the idea of the Leviathan, right? That goes all the way back to Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And the Book of the Giants, the Book of Enoch, and the Leviathan is all through Christian prophecy as well. But it basically has to do with this creature that is a giant reptile, or a giant fish that can hide from modern day science. Does that make sense? Like some people have equated
it hide,
to
or does it?
Loch
So
Ness.
is it hiding or is it sleeping? So, like
Well,
a big part of Revelation.
What would Cthulhu be? Cthulhu from H.P. Lovecraft would be basically the same idea, right? It's hiding or sleeping.
I feel like, that's the question, because sleeping might be different. So, like, hiding is one thing. We might not see it. It's but the idea that something is inanimate, suspended animation, indefinite hibernation for 1,000 years. There's this idea that this thing goes under for 1,000 years. The Titans in Revelation, Lucifer, or the Satan, is captured, and it's dormant for 1,000 years, and it wakes up once every 1,000 years, right? So it's just interesting to me because that isn't just like a new idea from a 90s movie. That's like the most primordial story. It's in like the Vedas, the Buddhists talk about it, the ancient Hebrews, and clearly the Babylonians. So when we talk about there be dragons and we're saying, okay, well, maybe there's something to this idea that dinosaurs and dragons are related. The next thing to consider, if there could be dragons, is what else did they say in those stories? Well, they say that these things went away for 1,000 years at a time, right?
Well, when a wild cat, tends to finally urinate, so to speak. Because again, if you're talking about biological functions over 1,000-year span, cats in the wild tend to hold on to it till it's this distilled, very perfumery.
Right.
I don't know. Very.
This is
pungent
actually,
smell.
I use this one a lot actually, because
But
when
imagine
people-
what if something did wake up after 1,000 years and then it burped and farted. Imagine what that would smell like. I mean, goodness
Right.
gracious.
Fire
I-
breathing dragon.
And it could be
It's just
chemically
methane all in its
yeah.
gut.
oh
from-
wow,
Centuries of mutton.
And it's actually a chemical
disgusting.
reaction that's designed to melt the ice that it thinks it's embedded in. Because 65
see?
million years, 100 million years is a long time for
This is starting to make
Dinosaurs.
sense.
So what do they call
The-
oil? They say oil is dinosaurs, right? Dinosaurs are dragons. So now we're getting
Right.
back to the idea of it's from their gut.
Sinclair.
But I just want to say this. I used to say, is the Pope Catholic? Someone asked me, you want to go out tonight? I'd be like, is the Pope Catholic? But that doesn't work anymore. You know, so like the better one to be.
Well,
Or-
so a tail in general is a large storage of fatty tissue that can be either jettisoned by some reptilian, I don't know about amphibian species, but there are also amphibians that will secrete mucus goo around themselves, like a type of frog, and you can basically put them in a brick in the wall of a house, and 5 years later, I don't know how many years they actually survive in that dormant state. But if you extrapolate the evolutionary success, or the I don't know about adaptations of dinosaurs to get bigger and stronger and fiercer and even fly and burrow and nest and communicate with each other, if you extrapolate that into long-term survival, there may have been a few versions of some species that have these adaptations that allow them to 1,000 years is a very long time on a biological scale, but the idea that you might find what looks like a desiccated skeleton or the remains of an organism that is the size of an elephant, and its outer layer is actually an exoskeleton that it's shedding, and inside it's rejuvenating, and if you dump water on it and get it to the right temperature, for all you know, it comes back to life. You're muted.
That's good, because what I was talking about was classified. No, but we have tardigrade super soldiers now. If you've read that, like they were saying, okay, a bunch of genetically modified super soldiers, Russia, China, and the United States as well, are using different things in tardigrades, which are great because of Tartaria, but also that's Special Olympics South Park episode where you learn that they can survive anything, right? And we talk about suspended animation, the idea that something could be frozen for indefinitely, right? Like the Alaskan tree frogs get like 9 months frozen. There's certain kinds of weird jellyfish things that can be frozen for 1,000 years theoretically, but we only have seen examples of it a few times.
I guess
Water
another.
bears? What are those things called? You guys know
Water
what they're
bears, tardigrades are water bears. That's the other name for them, is a tardigrade
called?
water
Okay,
bear.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And look at the locusts. I mean, it seems silly that something, whether it's for 7 years, 11 or 17 years,
Oh,
it's just kind of sitting
sweet.
dormant in the soil. And for all intents, if we found it, we would think it was dead. It was
Yeah.
it was the remains of something, and then it's just got a biological clock ticking on the inside on some sort of chemical trigger signal, and is
Dude,
able
what about
to.
what about nematodes, bro? Nematodes, though, because you could take a nematode and it could be frozen indefinitely. We find them all the time, like, oh wow, nematodes, they're still alive. They've been frozen for 10,000 years.
Well, and now RFK found one of these things in his head, right? I mean, RFK Jr., that's some shit, man.
Explains a lot, actually.
But there's a meme, brainworms, right? Everyone knows about the meme, brainworms, and it's kind of how everyone's acting. I think it's called pandemonium or something. It's a timely reference, perhaps.
Well, I could continue on about dragons, but I don't know. Maybe dragons are outside of the wheelhouse. Philosophically, bro, what do you think the world would be like if all of a sudden Rain of Fire happened?
Yikes.
See, I didn't see the movie, so someone else should hop in.
Basically, dragons show up.
Well, what is it? We all start having naked orgies outside in larger and larger groups until it lands and eats some of us and flies away, and we're offering ourselves to the beast, to this eternal, seemingly, or
What I
very
like
long-
about the Rain of Fire is,
Isn't that the story of the Americas, though? Was human sacrifice. And again, the reason that we don't have hair is because things that eat us they don't like fur. It doesn't help with the digestive process very much, and so we even keep ourselves clean. We'll keep the bacteria off us. We might even shave the little hair that we do have, and then again offer ourselves
to nature,
in ecstasy to be happy to perish in the stomach of some sort of leviathan. Or
I feel like you look at Rain of Fire. It's interesting that it's about in the future, because what you're saying is after the 300 or 400 years of like the millions that science believes in, like scientists believe that there's just all of this stuff going on. We even believe there's thousands of years at least of civilization before we get to the Enlightenment era. Then we have 300 years of people telling you the world's nothing like you were seeing it. The moon and the sun are completely different sizes, different distances. Everything's a lie. Dragons don't exist. You have to do all these things. Science will save your life. Get vaccinated. But then eventually they get to the dragon thing and they're like, okay, maybe dragons do exist. Maybe everything we told you was wrong. And I like that because you have this little window of this religion, this scientific religion in that movie, where they all believed this sort of thing that, dragons didn't exist, that we're living on a globe, the world's this way.
And what would we do? Let's say there were 10 known dinosaur dragon things that existed today. We would try to put them on display or in a zoo or capture them, and then very quickly there just wouldn't be any more of those things.
Yeah, they'd probably be like
if someone came from a village that was decimated by, it was breeding season and 3 of these things landed in the same place and took everything out, they would almost like Caesar's army become enlisted into the task of making sure that no one was supporting these things on purpose. And then there would be cultures they would hear about. Again, people are feeding themselves on purpose to these things. No, we need to stomp them out. So be a fine balance.
Basically talking about Godzilla.
Yeah, totally. Although Godzilla is a little bit more. The problem with Gojira is that it's like Godzilla is the response of humans, right? So saying, okay, human science has led to this. It's your fault that this has happened. What's cool in Rain of Fire is it's like, despite your best efforts to ignore reality, your philosophy of sciences will not save you. Reality will get you. Reality is, can take a nap every once in a while, but you can't, right? Like, I think that's kind of cool. The idea that we're so used to thinking that we've reached this amazing point, and this presentist idea that what we believe today is true. It's always been true. Maybe not everyone knew it, but now more people know the truth, right?
So that's bikini hole. You have the nuclear tests, right? Now imagine Bermuda. They find this underground cave chamber system, and instead of it being abandoned or rediscovered in modern times with no real connection to the people that lived in that space, instead there were things on the wall like warning signs, like warning, dragons come out of this hole. And sometimes, on odd years they come out of that hole. The kind of what you would do is say you were running nuclear tests and you would bomb the fuck out of those islands in the hopes that whatever babies or infants or adults of those species existed no longer thrived in any way, shape, or form. And you would call them nuclear tests, and you would be bombing the most beautiful tropical paradise. But someone's making the decision,
What about Skinwalker Ranch? Have you guys looked at Skinwalker Ranch much? Do you know what that is, right?
I do. I think the word Quetzalcoatl is mixed into our language, even from Catskill, New York, and you have lots of little alliterations where if these things the dodo bird eventually only existed on Mauritius, the island, and it had probably been stocked there as the same way people would stock islands in the Caribbean with pigs and stuff, and so that people, if they do crash land there or arrive there, they don't eat each other.
So it's like the predator hunting grounds. Kurt, have you heard of Skinwalker Ranch ever? You've kind of heard that term, right? Or have you ever seen a video on it or anything?
Sounds like a high school term.
Yeah, right. Skinwalker Ranch kind of feels like this ambiguous kind of anywhere, it's like an urban legend that you would hear, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Skinwalker Ranch, whatever. What's weird about Skinwalker Ranch to me, I hadn't paid much attention to it until about a year or two ago, because I knew that Bigelow, like Douche Bigelow, had bought it, right? Bigelow Air Jets had been some military contractor, had controlled Skinwalker Ranch. So I figured we're never going to learn anything, right? Like, obviously, if the military is involved, it's going to be a secret. We're not going to know. We, the royal we. B, if there isn't anything going on, or there is going on, like, that's no longer relevant. Now we know that the military wants this place and is using this place. So to me, it's like there's an interest there, right? Like, Skinwalker Ranch is worth how many billions of dollars to have this giant compound in the middle of Utah, right? And so we do that Mormon thing. So that also piques my interest. Okay, so now you go to Utah, Quetzalcoatl, dragon, underground, Skinwalker.
Well, and what the concept of a Skinwalker, I believe, is twofold. And one is the idea that I think in the last stream I was referring to surface dwellers versus people that were much more secure raising their family in a cave underground. And the only person that did go above ground did so with a giant hat that made it look like they had a bird head, and they had other things to distract these large beasts they may encounter. And they were just supposed to kind of bamboozle them or fool them. Now, the other side of that is that a Skinwalker, in this ultimate survival sense, will feed its family a dead human it found, but it will put it inside of the skin of an alligator. And so then when they roast it and cook it, the people eating it are none the wiser. And again, that's a much more twisted version of what a Skinwalker may be.
No, but you bring a good point up. Like,
but
imagine like if you were trying to survive in a land of mastodons and you were a circus carny who was really good at using those stilt legs, you would look like you were 16 feet tall, and that would actually be a survival mechanic. That's pretty interesting.
I watched the new Planet of the Apes movie, and something does occur to me when watching that, is that chimpanzees are kind of riding they're the fact that they have prehensile toes and thumbs on their feet would allow them not only to hold on as infants to their mothers if they have fur, but mastodon and mammoths, you could basically fall asleep on their back, and as long as you got this clutching reflex, you don't fall off, and you wake up wherever you wake up, but you're relying on the herd of the mammoth to kind of provide shelter and protection and decision about where you're supposed to be.
That's pretty sweet. That's pretty legit.
And I think the way that people put beads in their dreadlocks and in their hair and stuff as memory totems or that sort of thing, a lot of the stories about elephants and also mammoths is that when they would arrive en masse, the ones at the front would be adorned with what looked like clothing that, again, there were no humans around to put it on them. So people were very confused trying to figure out how that they made this clothing and donned this clothing. But
what weirds me out with the Skinwalker Ranch, I mean, it's not weirds me out, but it's interesting because they sold it finally, and I figured, okay, the U.S. military have done everything that they would want to do with it. Then if they sold it, there must be nothing there. But this Mormon guy, billionaire who owns a software company, bought Skinwalker Ranch. He's got this weird team. I don't know if you've seen, they've got like a documentary series where they're like studying Skinwalker Ranch, and it's just there's just such a perfect pulp there because you've got this religious belief that there are like angels, demons, bronze serpents, and seraphs that fly down. I mean, the idea of a flying bronze serpent is like a mechanical dragon, so that's already, Will, you got a thought there? I saw.
No. I was just agreeing with you. Like, you're onto something.
Yeah.
Hey, but
or an airplane or a blimp.
Do you know who Lauren Coleman is? A synchead. Are you guys familiar with who he is? Lauren Coleman is a cryptozoologist who runs the Cryptozoology Museum in Bangor, Maine.
Oh, really?
So he's like he's kind of a figurehead for individuals who search or review cryptid reports. But he also, around the 1980s, basically he came up with this idea of what he called the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle is basically a section of it's like a triangle that involves about 4 different states, and inside that triangle you get everything from pterodactyl sightings to ogre sightings, ghost sightings, weird kidnapping and serial killers, just a bunch of like random reports that are called 40N events. But he basically said that there's what you would call like weak spots, right? So the Skinwalker Ranch would be like a weak spot, or the Bridgewater Triangle in New England would be one. There's the San Luis Valley in Colorado that actually has like the UFO watchtower. There's one in Devil's Den in northern Arkansas.
What do you mean by a weak spot?
Where they're not necessarily like prone to cryptids, but they're also prone to like UFO abductions.
Yeah, the whole thing is connected. It's like season 5 of X-Files, where
So-
you start. Is it not? It's not necessarily aliens. It's not necessarily the government.
Right.
It's not necessarily child molesters. It's something though.
There's certain areas that seem to be prone to multiple, like with things that don't make any sense once you put them together.
Well, what
So
I
I
would say
consider it
about
like a weak
regions,
spot of like Skywalker Ranch doesn't necessarily just have aliens. It has aliens and shapeshifters and
Right. The guy they brought,
wolfmen and
they
lights
brought-
and orbs and all kinds of stuff that may or may not be. If they were reported independently, you might not necessarily put them together.
right.
But Coleman basically puts them together and groups them in geography, like locations that you can kind of see where something weird's going to happen there, but you don't necessarily like. There's no way to get a hold on what the actual phenomenon. It's like a weak spot where a whole bunch of different phenomenon happen.
it sounds like
Right.
a case for Space Force. No, I mean,
Well, that's the thing. The Space Force had literally. I'm trying. Let me look at your logo here. Bigelow Aerospace, the military government contractors that owned. Look at it. It's a dick between the letter B and G. Like it's straight up Bigelow. I'm not messing with you. This is the group that the private military finance aerospace company that purchased Skinwalker Ranch. They don't own it anymore. Now Skinwalker is Brandon Fugel. Brandon Fugel is this like he's such a like tight. You look at him, bro. He doesn't even look human. He's so Mormon. It's amazing. And he's got billions of dollars from software companies and drives around in a handmade Ferrari. Like he's just curious,
I
So
think
they get a
Andreas
bunch of
just
people.
admitted that he's not human. No,
Well,
I mean,
like you never know. But like, so you get to this new group of people that are checking
something to
it out.
be
and the
Mormon,
first
but if
thing
you
is they
also
find-
look Mormon, oh, geez,
yeah, that's a lot.
you're
I
outing
mean,
yourself almost.
It's a lot. It's a lot. Although I like the look. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he looks like he runs the bank, which is
He got like one of those jobs that we were told about when we were little that existed. But
he hung out at the bank so much they let him just keep the money. That's what happened to this guy. But you go to Skinwalker Ranch, it's just covered in extremely dangerous levels of radiation and really high electromagnetic fields. And that's weird because they're afraid to even dig, right? Because on one hand, you've got like, if you dig in a poltergeist scenario, superstitions occur, but also now you've got nuclear radiation. So
Well,
like
if
you get non-superstitious people, they're like, I don't think this is safe, right?
in the whole center of the United States, when there was an ocean and then it dried up, it became very concentrated with certain chemicals. And usually early metal forging was done in the ocean because you needed the water to cool it and no one was around to complain that you were polluting. You'd kind of go out to the middle of the ocean. But if there was some ancient metal forging, there would be radioactive stuff that would drip out of the bottom of their furnaces, the slag, and they may or may not have known it was dangerous or been able to detect it. But if there was, let's say 10 or 20,000 years ago, sometimes, in that Göbekli Tepe era, they, progressed from manipulating stone just for structural and aesthetic purposes, but also manipulating the stone to alchemize the ingredients inside of it. The remnants of those first giant furnaces that were built on the scale of almost, mini mountains, if not giant lakes and salt lakes and stuff like that, it would look like
Accumulate
that.
those minerals, right? Totally.
And you don't
Kinda
want to
like a
tell people they're
natural-
there because then someone's going to go mine them, and it's probably pretty concentrated in certain places. But and the other big issue is that there is no north-south trans-American highway from Mexico to Canada, and the United States has all these rules about lines that you are or aren't allowed to cross. And in Europe, that there's no such thing as a country that doesn't have a road from here to there, or the
We sort of
It's a
have
bunch
a road. We just have a really untenable tariff system. You know what I mean? Like,
but there are like 8
it's not just
highway
dollars.
systems
It's
that
like
go.
you have to
that
trade
go
your
east to
human
west.
rights. Well, so if you go on the 5, so in California we have this thing called the 5. It's a highway that goes straight down,
Sure.
and it reaches Tijuana, And from Tijuana, there's the Ruta Cinco.
And
So-
Route 1 goes all the way up the coast of California.
So
No, but I'm
one
saying
would
a place that's-
say that the Trans-American Highway System exists. You just can't use it unless you're like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is
around.
allowed to use
Imagine
that,
a highway with 5 miles on either side being considered an international area.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to Chile, down to the bottom of South America, the Cinco
What about like a
continues.
few corridors like that from north to south? Because there's a lot of highways from east to west, but a few, one on, maybe like 4 or 5 of them across the United States where there were these. Again, we're looking for giant construction projects and reasons to justify.
Canada has one road. Oh my God.
Does it have a stoplight?
Check your privilege, Stefan. All right.
And I'm just saying that all these anomalies in these areas where people are incentivized to move things by air and to either game or buy off or disrupt our Space Force monitoring system.
Well, I mean, also, like, what do you
They're just
do
trying
about
to get up to Canada?
Like, Kurt, imagine let's role play. Imagine it's 1920, and you work for the Park and Games Association, which is underneath like the wildlife and agriculture and all these administrations, which are now kind of in the military, because the military is making sure after World War I and into World War II, everything is safe. And you come across, I don't know, Sasquatch, something that's not normal. Like, do you tell? Do you protect it? Do you keep it amongst your like small agency, amongst your friends? Like, what do you do if you discover something like Sasquatch?
I probably wouldn't do shit, to be honest. I'm like, oh yeah, just I think it's the best form of karma would just be to be like, all right, you're doing your thing, man. That's perfectly fine. I think the best way to protect you is to not fucking tell a soul on this goddamn planet that you are here.
Well, because no one's going to believe you, and you're going to end up in a room with white walls and your arms like this, and you can't really move them that far.
Basically, yeah. That's why.
But although there's a guy who went on Joe Rogan who's using water to erode the tundra in Alaska, and he's finding all types of mammoth bones and other types of with the short-faced bear or something like that. But he says every now and then there's a situation where if you find what you think is like a Yeti pelt and skull and body, the remains of something that's like partially decomposed. Now, was it stuck in the permafrost for 10,000 years, or did it die like last Thursday? And then you call the local authorities because, the skull technically looks like a human. I don't know, was it wearing like a bear suit? And then the local authorities also don't want to end up in the white room. Padded room.
Yeah, you just pretend it was really old. Yeah.
And so it's like the geopolymer debate. If you say that all the stones in Peru are geopolymer, people are going to start cracking them open to find out if there's anything inside of them, and then there's not going to be any more
camera
room.
When you take the picture is all you would do, so that if you want to believe, you can, but it's not a clear picture.
But the same thing with most cryptid sightings, right? There would be some Bigfoot hunters or people that would come to the area if there was some sort of international news release that we don't know if this thing died 10,000 years ago or last year, but here, look, coming out of the permafrost, instead of a frozen woolly mammoth, instead of a frozen tiger cub, or there's frozen dogs they found. If someone did find a giant frozen humanoid or human-like thing, I wonder, what is the proper reaction to have?
Will is drawing super hard right now. I can tell. He's got some art happening right there.
Ow. But have you heard of the Alexander
Look at this.
technique as a not a fitness modality, but no,
the Alexander technique? What's that?
Yeah. Well, it's the idea that when you're moving, and especially if you're doing something vocational where you're drawing, and it's the way I came across it was learning about massage and standing over a person, and if you're hunching and leaning into what you're doing, again, pretend there's like a ballet teacher or a yoga teacher behind you, and whatever you're doing, like the Alexander technique is kind of existing in the role, like trying to get into flow state with what you're doing, and then check in with the role of the person that's like standing behind you with your hand on your shoulder going, now don't slouch, like make sure you keep your head back, or adjust your, make this more ergonomically friendly, or
well, Will had been doing some research recently with Frank Zero on reptilian shapeshifters, which I kind of relate to this in a lot of ways, because also there's this idea of, you see Sasquatch, and you tell your boss, and then your boss shifts back into a lizard person and tells his friends,
Right.
I don't know. That was more of an icebreaker than a.
Well, no, and again, you don't even have to really tell someone. I found some rare mushroom fungus, or no, it was the Monotropa uniflora, which is like a medicinal plant that grows off the fungus that grows off the roots of a certain type of tree. And I started filming all this stuff, and then I realized now there's a geotag and geolocated to this film, and again, I haven't gone back to see if someone's harvested it all or dug it up, but I chose not to touch it out of just assumption that that was someone's yearly wages right there, probably.
But Kurt, you're trying to have low karma, not like interrupt the lifestyle of the Sasquatch. What do you think about lizard people, or the idea that there are those who live amongst us that look like us and then yet aren't like us? That could even just be ideological, right?
It's a great metaphor, that's for sure. Now, the lizard people thing is funny because, like, I think really it's a whole symbolic thing. The thing that makes it fun to talk about as a phenomenon is the fact that it does seem like a lot of people have sold their souls essentially just for the consumer economy and just for the sake of keeping that machine turning. And so the most common person is probably Mark Zuckerberg when talking about lizard people. And it's just kind of funny. And I think the reason why it just has so much impact is not because people believe they're actual lizards. It's just that symbolic truth is just as important as actual truth. And so, like, literally, metaphorically, he's an actual lizard person. And so
we all have lizard brains, don't we?
Right.
Kind of.
At the center. And I feel like it's almost...
It depends on who you ask. 1960s model all agreed that we would refer to things as, the reptilian brain, the mammalian, or whatever.
And the reptilian is all that's left. When people are trying
now
to...
they call it the triune. They call it the triune brain, which is actually even more occult if you think about it. But yeah, keep going.
And the lizard brain might regenerate, and might the outer cortex, if it gets damaged, may or may not be as capable at repairing itself, because most reptiles, again, I think certain, or amphibians at least, will regrow limbs and
so you could play first-person shooter video games.
Accusing people of thinking only with their lizard brain, and then our monkey brain is the thing that has ADD, that has all these like crazy ideas that gets us in, curiosity killed the cat style. But the lizard brain at the center, and if someone's acting like a lizard person, then it's like almost like they've been lobotomized and they're under mind control.
I propose what we do is we start calling people that we don't know to happen to literally be lizard people, triunic people, because triunic refers to when we say the reptilian brain, the triune brain. And when you start to look for examples of people that live in the triune brain sphere, the first thing that comes up, of course, is video games, because people that play a lot of first-person shooters, play a lot of Fortnite and all that other kind of thing, they end up training the instinctual response part of their triunic brain. So if this happens, then you respond with this as quickly as possible. If your finger is touching heat, move your finger away from the heat as quickly as possible. You don't even have to think about that. Your triunic brain actually connects to your nervous system. Your nervous system knows the responses the triunic brain will have before it has it. It's like, oh, I know that guy. He's super predictable. He's going to do this. That's the idea of the triunic brain. So having really good instantaneous response is a good thing, but it is what we refer to as the reptilian brain. The idea of Thomas Jefferson. It's interesting,
right? Because one of the main aspects of the reptilian brain is what is called the basal ganglia. And his name is Patient HM. I think I've mentioned him on here before. But if you look up Patient HM, it's an individual
guy that has like water in 2/3 of his brain, and yet he still walks and talks.
Yeah, well, the memory part of his brain was completely obliterated. So it's like a partial lobotomy when he was 23 years old. And he's basically the guy who couldn't remember for 30 seconds, right?
Memento.
But what they learned was they could teach him skills. And it's because his basal ganglia was intact. So so this also happened to another guy named Phineas Cage, who was the individual who had a railroad tile go through his head. and his whole personality changed, and he couldn't remember certain things, but he could still work, because skill isn't necessarily part of our memory. But a lot of UFO researchers kind of associate the basal ganglia because it responds to like strobe lights and stuff. So the whole idea of aliens or individuals who have been abducted being controlled by aliens and or MK Ultra mind control is a lot of times zeroed in on that basal ganglia, because the basal ganglia can perform task without you remember performing the task.
Now, that photo of that last gentleman you were talking about there, he's holding a rifle, which I think is meant to be, or I believe it looks to be a weapon.
No, I'm pretty sure that's the spike that went through his eye.
Well, and the question is, does he still have the ability with moral reasoning? And he
became very aggressive. Phineas Cage in particular became very aggressive. Actually, I think he divorced his wife because he became irritated. So he was basically zeroed into the reptile brain, in which he was mostly working off of anger and negative emotions, things that are usually kept in check by the neo-mammalian or the frontal cortex of the human brain. Like actually knowing who you are and separating yourself from what's happening. And I don't know, I just think it's interesting. Like if you pay attention to certain researchers, the basal ganglia will always be talked about as far as like what they suspect is the function, where the functionality of actual mind control is taking place.
And as far as offering a standard of care, if someone is monitoring the health of an individual who's suffered that type of head trauma, it's interesting. I mean, because not only might they be more likely to harm other people, but they might be more likely to harm themselves. And
it's really interesting how the brain changes. I mean, have you seen Dr. Ramachandra? Hold on. Dr. Ramachandran's got a whole bunch of patients in San Diego, and he tells you, oh, is this the right one? No, this is not right. Hold on. Brain Dr. Ramachandra. I think that's right. Yeah, this guy right here. So I used to like hang out with Dr. Ramachandra in San Diego, let's just say. And so what he would do is he'll have patients that he studies for years who have the craziest brain damage, like they fall off a motorcycle without a helmet and they're still alive, or they'll miss a limb and stuff like that. He's done a lot of amazing work where they help people by putting a mirror up so that you can see your missing limb through your other limb, scratch the limb you have, and it gets rid of the phantom pain in the limb with the mirror box system. That's kind of his like main fame, is the mirror box system has helped a lot of people. But he does a lot of just studying the brain in general. And it's crazy. You can hit certain kinds of parts of your brain, which will completely change everything about. And granted, this is if you hit your brain. So imagine if you take like certain kinds of chemicals, or you're eating certain kinds of, or drinking certain kinds of food that have,
or like a random parasitic brainworm just eats its way randomly through your cortex.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
I mean,
well, that's exactly right. But I'm thinking of like how precise we can get, because now we have doctors that are studying the human brain, and we know exactly what happens if you like. I remember going to a NAMI conference right after watching, after the NAMI conference, I watched Nitro Turbo Circus, whatever that thing is, where they like run into each other on motorcycles and do tricks. It's like Jackass, but more extreme.
Yeah.
And I'd seen in this, NAMI conference all about mental health, the different kinds of effects of different brain trauma. Like if you hit your brain here in the cerebral cortex, you might accidentally, affect your limbic system. You might start to affect your pineal gland's production of melatonins, like all these different things that'll happen. You could become a sociopath. You could be tripping on psychedelics all the time. You could have a hard time sleeping. You could always have too much energy. You could be tired all the time.
Well, and when MTV took on these projects too, there's a certain, with what is it, the Screen Actors Guild, where there's a mandate that there's some sort of insurance for if something happens, and how much does one signing a waiver at the beginning of that really indemnify
studying
the people that are
Tennessee, bro. They're just studying them because as soon as you hit your head, then they're interviewing them,
right.
and then they interview them.
Now here in
later.
Massachusetts,
and you're like, you get to see though someone become a sociopath.
Here in Massachusetts, there's
someone
one
hits their
school,
head in a car accident just the right way, and they'll never love again. It's really crazy, and these are the kinds of things that you can find. You could do it in just the right way that you fall in love with people all the time. You could become
what
really.
It makes me realize is like inside out as a thing. There's not really one aspect of your brain. There's like a bunch of different things that are kind of specialized. We view that, or we view consciousness as one whole, right?
And I love that you use we.
Right, well, the royal we. Everybody
consensus.
kind of views consciousness as a smooth transition of inside
in this
thought
particular
versus
instance,
outside.
though, we and they, like, this makes sense because you're a political body.
But so what I was saying here in Massachusetts, electroshock therapy is condoned for use on children. Because there's no specific law that, and now we wiped it out of the psych wards when Reagan, I think it was, released everyone in the 70s or something, and
good for
it was the idea that there was inhumane practices there, and adult electroshock therapy is used very sparingly, but there is a specific school, and you see videos of kids that instead of just their bad behavior manifesting in making a mess or being disobedient, or they're hitting their head against the floor or the wall every time that they get stuck in a certain situation. And as far as relative scale of interventions and the harm that one may do, the school is now named after a judge. People have been trying to shut it down for as long as it's been open, and apparently there was a judge who was willing to take a look at certain cases and facilitate.
I would recommend keeping your kids away from head injury prone sports. I don't know if that sounds too nerdy.
If possible.
Like, I feel like you should probably like not have your kids bouncing the soccer ball on their head.
Well, should football be legal?
That's a good question. All right, Kurt, you know more about football than anyone here, I think. I could be wrong.
That's a fun question. Should football be legal?
I'm going to be the party pooper and say no. I think sports make people like objectively more stupid.
It's more interesting if we fight. Well, but I mean, I'm saying specifically football.
Yeah, but yeah, Kurt, keep going. I want to hear it out.
Yeah.
No, like I look at, like, I don't know, you could actually read a lot of books, which is not something that's very American. But if you want to read books, there's a lot about, this entertainment consumer culture that we have and what a big machine it is and how everything feels. Like, how big of a controversy this year, everybody's like, oh, every Super Bowl is rigged. Well, it's like, they're kind of right. And it's like, oh, look, it's like, if you wanted to like put something through AI of a summary of the Super Bowl, I'd probably spit out Taylor Swift won the Super Bowl this year. Like, there's just
didn't she?
Basically, yeah. She also has a kind of a semi-famous quote when asked what song she wished she wrote. She said the Friends theme song because look at those royalties. But like that was her like literal actual quote.
Dang, what a witch! Now I like her more. Jeez.
No, I think football makes us objectively worse people, and the people that are fans,
they wear helmets, and so Kurt. But what do you think about slap fighting? Again, of all the sports that we could just have, this one it's solely rooted in the infliction of head injuries on other people. That's the only, and there's no padding, there's no this slap competition. The fact that it's economically viable is one thing. But unless it's Running Man style and all those people are actually on death row and that they somehow get a waiver as long as they agree to participate in this televised
not two hands.
I don't understand it. There's
How about slapping?
UFC and fighting, it's a skills competition. It's an ancient art form. There's lineages, but slap fighting, America, come on.
All right.
Come on.
Put off the question. Let's do the rant. Let's do it.
Slap. I mean, anything that doesn't come with commercials, I'm fine with. I think that's morally fine.
You're against commercials?
Yes.
Tell me about that. Tell me about that. Tell me about being your best. I mean, as a guy who hasn't really done any product endorsements yet, tell me about what you're against in commercials. Well, because I have a bunch of them that interrupt the show. People are always annoyed by that.
Currencies. What I was going to say is commercials seem like they're going to be just the main currency of the future. It's like almost nothing we have is without advertisement or without some underlying endorsement. And so it seems like we're like praying to the gods that they're going to save us from whatever the fuck. I don't even know. Everything has to come with an endorsement, and often it's an endorsement of things that the product is advocating against. Like if you go and look up a philosophy channel, they're like, oh, by the way, we're totally, the whole philosophy video here is about the use of currency and why that's a bad thing for everyone. And then you're like, have you heard of PNC Bank or some just off the wall contradictory presentments? Like, yep, we have to do this. We're all bending over to this force that says, hey, we need to endorse things. So like, why can't I just go outside and smell the flowers without seeing a billboard for something? It's like that meme. I love that meme that said, it's a picture of the Grand Canyon, and it just says, look how much potential this place has. And it sticks a Walmart right in the center of the meme. And I was like, I think that is kind of where we're going as a society. But
that is the one thing that the Grand Canyon is kind of missing is what? No, so
I feel like we got to do it a different way, though, right? Like, here's my problem, right? Like, so I can put my name on T-shirts, and I can make cool looking T-shirts, and those are cooler T-shirts than other people have because my designs are awesome, you know. And I'll just, you know, I can make another design. But also, like, if I could endorse things, I wouldn't be against it. Like in certain ways, like if I were to say like, yeah, I like this shirt is way more comfortable than a lot of other shirts I've ever worn. I'm older than I was when I was younger. I know that this is a great shirt. If you like this shirt, I could tell you where to get this shirt, something like that as an example. I think that would be cooler than the way it works right now, because right now it's like, and now you can get like meals delivered to you that are frozen or something like that.
This is a developing paradigm within media. Not only did things go streaming and they're trying to figure out where the advertising revenue is going and coming from. Stephen Colbert, when he started having his segment sponsored by Doritos, even though he was on Comedy Central, and then he's pocketing money outside of the salary he's being paid. And again, he's doing something to say, is this legal or not? And then how does that translate, you know, up and down the ladder in media production? But I was actually just rewatching Wayne's World 1, and there were very few scenes I actually remembered specifically when I think I saw it in the theaters growing up.
See, look how happy
the one scene where they were talking.
Right? They're great shirts. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. By the way, the fashion that Andre. Yeah, no.
I mean, like they're like, if you didn't know who I was, like the shirt's still cool.
But for anyone who hasn't seen Wayne's World, there's one kind of famous scene where the show goes out of his basement. They've recreated his basement in a giant high-dollar studio, and they're trying to get him to advertise things, and they're following him around backstage as they're arguing with the producers. And what they do is they cut to him very slowly eating Pizza Hut, and there's a set of lenses and lighting that's used, and he looks directly into the camera and goes, and then he's holding a bag of Doritos, and then they scan Garth from toe to head, and he's wearing a Reebok, you know, jumpsuit with a hat, and it's like 5 minutes in the middle of the movie. That's literally, that's how they funded the movie. I think famously Ali G funded his movie In the House because there's the John Nike Leisure Center, and he just had to put the word Nike in the movie a certain number of times. And even though it wasn't related to the brand, he found a way to do it, and he was able to negotiate in such a way where he was able to get paid enough to do the work that he wanted to do, which was create a comedy.
Yeah, old Donnie, he was in a lot of commercials back in the day. He did a McDonald's Big and Tasty commercial. And so
I mean, last thought on Wayne's World. If I were Lorne Michaels, I would have been so pissed. That first movie was terrible. I mean, compared to Ali G's first effort, you know, Sacha Baron. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
My thoughts.
I think there's such a strange feeling. It's almost like we need a new word to describe the feeling of seeing like what was the president like 30 years ago on a commercial for some like such a giant like business.
You know what I want to do?
Wait, you guys did. Hold on. This is very.
I want to
Bob Dole endorse Viagra. That's all I'm going to say. I remember sitting with my parents during the presidential campaign and watching a Bob when I was like 12, and a Bob Dole Viagra.
Bob Dole's awesome,
and it was just one of the most uncomfortable moments.
Good for Bob Dole. Bob Dole was super stoked. I don't know. I have no problem with Bob Dole doing that.
He had like just dropped out of the race, though.
I want to endorse. Good for him. I want to endorse mineral water. I want a certain one, maybe, or just in general. I'm not sure. Maybe just like drink mineral water, like, you know, like Department of Milk, kind of dairy, like mafia, like just any milk. Drink mineral water. I should have like ads that are just telling you to do that, and then see if I can get like the mineral water mafia behind it, which is probably Coca-Cola.
What I was saying is
Coca-Cola
one of us
owns,
should
like,
brush
all
our
the
teeth.
water companies.
There's got to be like the dental association. This goes to many countries. You know, YouTube is broadcast everywhere. So shouldn't there be every country's dental association gives you 50 cents every time, and the more countries you get signed up, every stream you're earning $50 because as like a bit, someone is or using dental floss. That's what they're doing. Is they're either using dental floss or using
That's
those
a good one
toothpicks or
too.
something.
Dental floss. I don't know. Like I don't have a problem.
And
with
someone just has to. You have to like secure the first contract and offer it for $5 or literally for 50 cents on the premise that if you can replicate that and reach out internationally to every country's, you know,
you know
there's
what?
watermelon associations. There's
What about
associations
that
for
thing
everything.
that people wear so that they don't get, you know, when you sleep, so you don't need a CPAP machine, so you don't get, what's that called? Where you like, you know, you stop
There's
breathing.
a certain mouth guard you're talking
Yeah,
about.
there's like that mouth guard thing. I don't know. I should get like things that save lives, like this thing that goes in your mouth and it like,
Yeah,
you can't snore, you know,
yeah.
keeps you from dying.
Huh.
Like I would
For back
endorse
sleepers.
a thing like that. So I don't know. I feel like there's ways that you could do it, especially the way it works today, because now it's like social. And if you choose, so I talked about this the other day, actually, there's situations where people are choosing to speak about things that are so unendorsable by like the agenda.
Like Box Saga, yeah.
Oh man, you know.
Or like Jeffrey, what happened at Jeffrey Epstein's Island before Jeffrey Epstein's Island? Yeah.
But I don't know anymore because you also have the social media aggregate. So like if you make a video game about, you know, like Escape from Jeffrey Epstein's Island, you're probably going to be like, it's kind of like going to balance out.
And you were making a commentary though about so you were saying you were looking into,
you got to not care so much
instances.
about like, so you have to not care so much about who endorses you and so much more about what you endorse. And that's like, I think a big difference, because a lot of these people are so desperate to get an endorsement and you're just like, what? Like,
yeah,
why
I mean,
are you now talking about this thing?
A historical figure that did this. There's a guy named
Jean.
Jean-Jacques Lucot, and he did these engravings of fanciful architecture on a very large scale, technologically, but then he also did a bunch of very pornographic
sleep apnea. Thank you.
So this is back in like the 1500s, 1600s, I think. You know, he's sticking out his tongue. He's one of the first people to do a self-portrait where he's sticking out his tongue at himself in a mocking way. And again, who knew that was a human gesture in the 1500s? Where else would that really be recorded? But so his method, he wanted to be preserved, and he knew there was a specific place where anytime it was flagged with potentially explicit material, and his name was then associated with, so as things were being pushed through libraries or through bookstores, all of his material would be flagged, replicated, and then stored in this, you know, forbidden library.
Yeah, they're not paying me, by the way, but I found the product, like Snore RX, what I'm talking about. So if you get sleep apnea where you like stop breathing when you sleep, like there's this thing that you put in your mouth, right? And like it keeps you from snoring. But also what that does is keep you from having lack of oxygen, which will kill you and like, over a period of time make you brain dead and also give you all kinds of other problems like dementia.
They advertise that on sports radio here in
all right.
Boston. But so here, just a random
like,
poll.
I would probably be down
who
with
sleeps
that.
on their side versus their back versus their stomach.
I like to roll around.
Poll.
I like to sleep on the back of a mastodon that just takes me everywhere across the herd.
See, I for the longest time I was a stomach sleeper, and now I can't imagine how. So I've become a side sleeper, and like I feel like eventually I'll become
American
a
Time Machine.
But
I know you said you had to head out, and now you're gonna head out soon, huh? And we didn't like give you a philosophical conversation.
American Time Machine, at least are you back sleeper, side sleeper?
Back mostly, sometimes side.
I don't know. Pivot it. Give me like a last word, like for you before you leave. Like tell me like a story. Talk about a different philosophical thing that's been deep in your heart. You know, what have you been up about?
Rich people are never satisfied. As long as you remember that, you'll do fine in life.
Sure.
Yeah, honestly.
Because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah.
Yeah. We can change the world. We can change the world. Yeah, trust me, we can do it. But we actually have to want to do that.
I think climate change, right? We're with all the chemtrails and shit now, we're pretty good at it. No?
Okay,
Definitely changing the world.
Here's Here's a good one. I don't think there's anything. We're so small and insignificant in one way that I don't think there's anything we can do to this planet that'll actually destroy it. It's kind of collective narcissism to think that we actually can. But the other side of that is like the only thing that could happen is we fuck something up so bad that we go extinct. And I think Mother Nature is just fine because yeah, Mother Nature is smarter than we are. That's just.
But
what I
is
have to say
life
about it.
less amazing and beautiful without our ability to perceive the earth? And if only elephants are left as the highest form of consciousness and dolphins, did the world, is the universe missing something now? And again, it's hubris. It is the self-importance of humanity. But I think that's a legitimate question.
Rephrase. Sorry.
So we are the universe's most refined tool for perceiving itself. We build telescopes and arrays of radio antennas to try, and
we being
are
the
able
superorganism
to-
humanity, which is a giant crab, right? With a telescope for a hermit shell. Yeah.
And would intelligent life ever arise again? You know, it's a crapshoot. And has it evolved before or adapted into existence in the past? Is one question. But
probably. I think we live in a world of kind of infinite possibilities. So chances are there is intelligent life out there somewhere, and yeah, depending on how we think about the whole temporal loop thing going on, it's like there definitely is other dimensions out there that already has it. So it's like the whole world right now. I think if you think about the world being born out of sense of just one force trying to satisfy another and just trying to achieve some sort of balance, I think that makes the world make sense, and then you can actually love the world and change it how you need to change it. So I think that's the end. It's difficult. The hard thing and the tough thing is to actually be a kind human being to other people and actually like show care and concern. And I think that's what makes you the real Chad bro alpha male thing. Yeah, is actually doing the things that all these dating coach people online are telling you. It's really just the opposite. You know, just care and concern. Do the hard thing.
Drink mineral water, everyone. Drink mineral water.
I like it.
All right. I love you, Kurt. We'll see.
But I like what you guys were saying about as far as like commercials and streaming goes. It's weird because now streamings are going. We all chose streaming because it got rid of our commercials, right? And now they can't make any money, so we're going right back to.
I chose streaming because I didn't have I lived in like a really weird, Santa Cruz, right? Have you ever been? You've been to Santa Cruz, right?
Close enough.
Okay, so yeah. So this is how it works. Because do you ever watch that movie Tall Tale? Disney.
I think so.
Where he like meets Pecos Bill and everything like that.
Oh yeah.
They're in a place called the Valley of Heart's Delight, which ironically is what Silicon Valley used to be called. The Valley of Heart's Delight. They changed it to Silicon Valley because they found silicon near Silicon Valley and the beaches. Really, it's more that they started building semiconductors there in general. But
I thought it was a story about how the Twin Towers used to exist. And some people didn't believe it. But.
Well, you got Pecos Bill and Paul Bunyan on a blue ox and everything. It's a great movie. It's an amazing movie. But the idea that they were in the Valley of Heart's Delight and the train's coming in and it's going to destroy. I forget what we were talking about, right? That's how deep this metaphor got. What were we talking about right before this?
We were talking about commercials on streaming.
Yes. Okay. So we started out in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is a place where if you're like outside of Santa Cruz and you're driving around in California, you're thinking in California like Hollywood, right? So the radio in San Jose is like, hey, everybody, you're listening to 81.2.5. I just got this new song that's coming on the radio. Everyone call this caller number 36 just won this new thing. It's really loud and etc. You go over the hill, the mountain, the Santa Cruz Mountains, and then you go into the Santa Cruz Mountains, and all of a sudden you're in the valley. You're outside of the internet. You're outside of the radio. So the radio goes like, la, 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 and when you go into Santa Cruz, there's like two stations, and one of the stations is like, the views and expressions of KZSE do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the advocates and philanthropists who paid for this station. And the other one's like Mexican music. So that was like earlier in Santa Cruz before Silicon Valley emerged. And when all of a sudden this idea was like, you'll be able to connect with digital radio to a server and listen to and watch media. It was a big deal because it was overcoming the hurdles that bureaucracy had made it impossible since World War II to interact. Because in the old days, apparently before I was a child, there was a train that could go anywhere in California that they knocked out for World War II, worried that the Japanese would take it. And we never got our train back. And the infrastructure in California has just never been,
I mean, the Jews from Europe were, trains weren't their best friend, necessarily.
That's an interesting perspective that I'll never forget.
Coming from a Jewish family, there's just, I get an icky sense from the train when it's too long and two people are like too willing to get on it. I don't know. It just didn't always work out.
How right it can be, Stefan, sometimes.
And we're supposed to flee on foot. Like they use there's apparently California, from what I understand, there's like only a couple highways that bridge certain east-west divides. And that
right now you can't even take the Pacific Coast Highway. Like one of the things that people don't understand, like we've literally got moments when they open it and we look for it like windows at a bank, like, oh, they're going to be open. Like they destroy, like it falls apart and then they don't rebuild it. And there's areas that they just continually,
and it may be a remnant from a time when we were driving herds of bison and mastodons and we needed to have these choke points, and humans, on one hand, you could choose to like fight them and like jump in front of them and stick them with spears and try to kill one of these things. Or you just had to know the time of year where there's a cliff and there's like 1,000 dead ones right there. I don't know. It's going to rot. It's like, do we harvest or like, what do we do? And as long as you learn to salt the meat and distribute it, there's like and part of the herding migration process is a culling of the herd that doesn't have to come at the blade of a willing actor necessarily. And these things probably were there as latent kind of landscape architecture that was enhanced over time to influence the kind of unthinking herding brain to just go to these certain choke points. And I think with zombie apocalypse simulations, humans end up in these choke points. But
there's some about it. I don't know. I don't disagree. Meta Egg, also, I just want to ask you, because you did a couple of videos recently, and you sent me a couple of links before this. Was there something that you wanted to cover? You talked. I got a sync book link about chapter 27, Utero.
Oh, no, I didn't want to give you that. Ignore that. That was messages between David and I.
How dare you? How dare you?
Yeah,
Okay.
David and I are actually, I don't know if I'll be on Tuesday for Sync Tank or not. I don't know if he'll have me. I don't know if there's a space available, but directly after that, I'm going to do a show with David Play on his sync work. But this morning, I just had a show talking about shape-shifting reptiles in 1990s cartoon with another Sync Tank veteran, Frank Zero.
The illustrious Frank Zero, yes.
Yeah, well, with fun thought experiments, we were talking about the trium brain, or what was it called? The trillium?
Yeah, we actually talk about that. We didn't call it the trillium brain, but we did talk about the reptile brain. We kind of like came to the conclusion that most all of those mythos about shape-shifting reptiles have to do with like them being some sort of archons that harvest fear and negative emotions. And that's what the reptile brain basically governs. So there's some sort of relationship there.
Well, and in order for Neuralink to really work, the idea is it would probably have to have wires all the way down into that base of the brain. The way that they're harvesting thought signals from
pretty wild. It's called the reptilian or triune, right? Because the triune is like Trinity, Trimurti, the Triskull. I could go on. There's a lot of
so
things.
Let's say that you found a Sasquatch. Here's that question is, what would you do if you found a live Sasquatch? Would you offer to transplant its brain into a human, or give it like laser hair removal so that it could look more humanoid? Or let's see, and like if you could transplant an elephant brain into a human, or like a dog or a cat brain into a human, what would be most noticeable in terms of its intellectual shortcomings? What if fun things that I hope nobody experiments with, but
I feel like the idea of the
comic books, perhaps.
The idea of the lizard. That's why they're trying to change the word from lizard to triunic to say that there's like base, stem, and higher thinking levels. But that's interesting that they use the model, and now that they're saying maybe it's like, what is this? Is this speciesist or is it racist against reptiles? Let's be honest. What are they trying to say about that? The triunic brain is interesting. but it's also pervasive in our youth. All of the cartoons we ever saw. I mean, Rainbow Bright to X-Men.
Well, we basically tracked it down to Conan.
X-Men.
Conan in the 1930s had one story out of all of Conan that had to do with shape-shifting reptiles that were using magic.
Really?
But that spawned
Well,
everything
they were called
else.
Sleeslacks in Lost World lore. The show, they were called Sleeslacks. These just kind of slow moving. And the idea, if something could be where we started out, could something be asleep for 100 years or 1,000 years? Well, reptile, it doesn't fit the paradigm of life and self-preservation that we exist in because we're warm-blooded mammals. But yeah, no, there are big reptiles that once they get cold, if they're not digesting something, and they become real vulnerable and slow-moving, like turtles, basically, like slow turtles, and until they are able to bask in the sun. And then their metabolism speeds up, and they're like, oh yeah, I should probably run away from that or catch that or eat that. But the idea that there would be a more exaggerated version of that type of slowed metabolic activity, such that it could survive multiple annual cycles of like a tardigrade. And I guess maybe the answer to the question is yes, that type of life form does exist, and it's called a tardigrade, right?
Yeah. But we're seeing like immediate genetic modification. So you guys read Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, right? Yeah, maybe.
Negative.
Okay, good book.
Recommended
Dude, Robert Anton Wilson was the editor for Playboy, amongst other things. So he had the conspiracy section of the magazine, and he said, send in your weirdest conspiracies. And he compiled a bunch of them together. And this is really smart because then he could say, hey, here's a bunch of conspiracy theories I got out of Playboy magazine. Okay, I'm not saying these are real. Right. These don't shoot me.
Get a load of these guys, right?
Yeah. Like I don't need to die at the edge of a pyramid of roads in some weird like 13th day of the. Just look, I'm just saying these are possible things that people that are crazy and degenerate said. So that was a good way to keep himself safe. But he ended up writing like that idea of Atlantis story down, which was that in a long time ago there was this world that was this world, but it was a long time ago, and people had great technology. They could do anything, right? In fact, that was part of the ideology of the society. Do what thou wilt, essentially. Like do anything you can do, be all that you can be, kind of a thing. Army of one.
So humanity's inferiority complex kicks in when the arguments about was there a great civilization in the past is kind of when it goes to the extent of they could do anything, because can we do anything? Can we go back to the moon? Can we go to Mars?
The thing, these people were different than us. In this version of society, they were taller, better, live longer, healthier. They were also covered in fur like Chewbacca. You have to remember that this is, a long time ago.
That way the dinosaurs and dragons didn't eat them because, again, those reptiles are smart and they don't want to have hairballs. And so
it also kind of implies, in a similar kind of to the Bach saga, that a lot of these things are made, or more like the Jakob story. A lot of these animals that we see like are actually genetically modified and created for the amusement or for the benefit, whatever way, of an ecology created by these, these super sorcerer humans that are maybe 10 feet tall or whatever and covered in fur. But one of them eventually, because they can do anything, there's no rules, right? Like other than if you have an idea, you should like try to realize it, try to make the thing happen, because that's so cool that we can. Instead, somebody
like the reality show, The Biggest Poser.
Somebody comes, exactly. Someone's like, let's make a bald person. We're all covered in fur. Wouldn't it be kind of funny if he's like totally like us? He's pretty much just like us, but he's like bald. Okay, maybe he's got like a little bit of hair on his head, but like under his armpits sometimes, but like pretty much.
Well, but the question is to get back to advertising.
No, he's like a bald cat, like the whole head, like a bald little mouse. That was the idea. So they make this bald person, and he's super smart.
When you talk about limitations and what creates sustainability, you're talking about you driving into a certain radio district and getting option for 2 different feeds you can tune into. And it's, if you're not hearing commercials, you have to assume that it is some sort of government subsidized entity that is there as part of an emergency, either FEMA or some other system that has to exist. And so even if there's less commercials on it, they're not doing fundraisers all the time. Either that, or there are a few individuals who but those things are usually rather short-lived. If you're gonna, by incorporating commercials into it, you're also then adopting the guise of civilian broadcast.
Well, it could also be like, you're trying to figure out how to market phenomenological diversity and show what's going. But that's the other thing, you're getting attention, right? Like, get attention for this. This is more unique. This is more unique. I made a bald monkey human that's super unique, but they raise it, right? They raise this person. It's got a bald face for the most part, but they raise it, and it's super smart.
See, would they be accused of war crimes potentially? Because imagine you're talking about like, oh, we captured a Russian and we taught him to speak English, or it's like, or vice versa. They come and capture a bunch of Americans and they raise them in their culture, and they say, look, they can walk and talk, they can play music. Look where they were just going to be farmers.
Okay, I said no, but in a way. So what ends up happening in the Illuminatus trilogy, again, this is the Robert Anton Wilson book. They've made this Atlantean bald monkey thing, and they teach it sciences, engineering. It understands where it comes from. They made you as a joke, and he doesn't understand exactly why. They explain that the ideology is do what you can do what thou wilt, be what you can be. He's like, that's pretty weird. So eventually he's a scientist. He's like, I have an idea. I don't like that rule. I think this idea of do what thou wilt is a little extreme, a little generous, and a little general. Maybe we need
just a little. But yeah.
Maybe I have this idea.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe it's like, if I think this is like a good idea, that like it should be done, like it ought to be done, then I ought to do it, right? And if it ought not be done, then I ought not do it, right? And this is this crazy thing, because they're thinking to themselves, well, it's harmless to do things. Do what you want to do. Like, if people don't like it, whatever. Like, they can't. When it comes to the small
personal decisions that one makes, adopting the place to relax into is, it's kind of an adaptation of what may come. What shall come may come, or something, and it's like surrendering to the moment. But when you're talking about do it that will with all of the power that you have somehow,
he's like, I
cornered
resemble
in the universe.
He's like, I resemble
the
that
same
remark.
rule book you're using for like,
do
I want to brush my teeth before I go to bed? I don't know. I'm already pretty comfortable, and like I'll just brush them in the morning. It's like, do it that will. It's like,
right. So he says like better off not, but they decide, okay, now we're probably going to have to choose between these two ideologies. So a war kind of emerges, and this leads to the fall of Atlantis. People that say you ought to follow this right and wrong, which eventually degenerates into like good and evil and like the confused versions we have of today, versus people that are still following the Setian path of do what thou wilt, which can manifest great like opportunity, but doesn't necessarily fit into what is part of nature.
And when it comes to advertising, to like totally take it out of nature, because right now you're talking about it in terms of universal forces. But for instance, Post Malone was able to carry around Bud Light and kind of get paid as a spokesperson for the brand, even though he was under 24 years old when he was doing this. And in the past, it was in this time of where Sesame Street all of a sudden was talking about vaccines, and there were like a few major broadcasting lines in the sand that had been drawn and are now crossed. And when it comes to advertising and monetizing things as well, it is a time of confusion, perhaps, and multiple strategies, and you're kind of expected to be a jack of all trades. When I heard Stephen Colbert talking about being both kind of the writer producer in the writer room for his show, and then transitioning to the on-screen personality, which I think is the thing that people like Andreas get the least amount of credit for. People that do live streaming and are willing to speak extemporaneously off the top of their head about subjects that they're not prepared for in any way necessarily. And it's called making the turn. And at some point, I think Colbert was famous for like slapping himself in the face a few times hard enough until it hurt. And he didn't admit that in his most recent interview. He said something about, meditating, or because I hope he's abandoned that practice. That's not the best way to like, but there's something about making the turn from creator to on-air talent and engaging in
drink mineral
with
water
the camera and the guests, that sort of
drink
thing.
That mineral water.
But
so
for all those people out there trying to that do enjoy participating via comments or other things, there is and Stephen Colbert as well had this. He said, when he got the Tonight Show, it was the first time he was appearing on television as himself. He's an actor. He played lots of different roles. One of the roles he played was Stephen Colbert. So to make the turn, he just had to get in character and say that, right, what I'm going to do. He said he wanted to sound like a high society, low information idiot sort of thing.
Check out Keenan's post What is advanced philosophy? What is the difference between erotic and kinky? Erotic is using a feather. Kinky is using the whole chicken.
If you say so.
It's pretty interesting. Thanks, Keenan. I like that. I don't know. What if you build a world though where everything is acceptable? That's kind of the idea. If everything was acceptable, and then
Very,
people
very
just didn't-
libertarian anarchists.
yeah, then people just could choose not to proliferate things that they found disgusting.
Well,
Unless
very
they
quickly people would begin to organize to try to control other people. You're saying if you could push a button and reset and announce that no rules exist anymore, right away you'd have people organizing to try to at least probably to control the local environment or.
Yeah, but there's something about this idea of like promiscuity. I think that he's referring to as well. This idea that humanity has built itself around rules that are thinking like this is right and wrong, as opposed to these are rules of the state. Whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. They're just the rules of the state. And when you're in this, when you're in this McDonald's, you have to follow the rules of the McDonald's. They're not right. They're just the rules of the McDonald's.
Well, to bring it back to the kind of late night concept, there was a 94-year-old guy, I think it was on Johnny Carson, and he was a farmer. He was in great shape, and he's up there, and he's talking about how he left this state with his wife and his family, and he went to this other state for a couple months and lived with his girlfriend, and everyone went, oh, and it's like, so how many years do you have to give as a farmer before you're allowed to have a wife and a girlfriend? Especially if one is
which state is this?
you anyways,
Just kidding.
But, and again, I don't know if there is a right answer to that question, but when you see a 94-year-old in that position and he wasn't really embarrassed or he wasn't trying to be Joseph Smith or declaring anything moral about it, he was just telling you where he was finally at in his life. I don't know what the answer to those questions are. I think polycules tend to collapse because humans are jealous, conniving creatures, and if they have the capability, they were like birds that kick out the other ones in the nest. If we get
Are we jealous, conniving creatures, or does this have to do with scarcity? Is scarcity
a false sense of certainly an imposed false sense of scarcity?
Dude, Felix the cat, right? Oh my god, what a cool guy! Have you guys watched that movie, the '90s Felix the Cat movie? Dude, the Felix the Cat movie from the 1990s is like out of control.
Animated in 3D or in 2D?
It's in both.
Far out.
It's mostly in 2D, but there is like an intro part where they have like, I remember this hypnotic 3D intro where the cat looks you in the eye and it says, "Hey, I have a new movie. Come check it out." And the movie is this wild trip where this cat goes into his bag and through a portal has to save a princess. In this other dimension, people live in a world where they try to trap smog in the buildings, and they're all like goblins and ghouls, and there's stalagmite and stalactite again.
Well, and as your meme on Twitter says, that's pinned to the top, propaganda is art for a reason. If it's this easy to brainwash people with a cartoon character that's anthropomorphized in these fantastical stories into doing, what
does his bag look like to you again? Like, let me try to find like
that's how you end up with
his bag is black and yellow. What are the colors of the Tartarian flag? Right, he's got a black and yellow flag.
Okay,
Black and
bag.
black and yellow.
And they're X's, right, or crosses. I think that's pretty interesting. There's something there about Felix the cat, a lot to be said about this particular animation, and he's super obsessed with that black and yellow, right? Considering it's a black and white cartoon. We didn't know that at first.
Well, but again, your memory of it, because again, it's what imprints in the brain. Remember, it's like with Wayne's World, I remembered the commercials they inserted because I don't know why, but there was a certain type of framing where when the main character of any show looks you in the eyes, especially if you're below a certain age, it has a more direct effect and influence on one's psyche. And that's why they made it illegal for like Mickey Mouse. You can't be watching X-Men on Nickelodeon, during programming for children's hours, and then have a commercial where the X-Men turn to the children and say, "You should go buy our action figures or go buy our video game." And it was just a fine line that they found that shouldn't be crossed, because otherwise you'd have kids demanding the most absurd and ridiculous things. And it's so easy, again, with just cartoons to fool people into these paradoxymoronical paradigms that are rattling around in their head and then manifests in these large scale protests and social movements that, again, I think it's a beautiful thing to say that it's one of the first times in human history that you can be who you want to be and love who you want to love. And I just think that's an awfully glass half full, view of things. Because in Palestine, that's fucking not true. And to say it now, Cat Williams opens up some of his, more recent stand-up routines by saying, it's an amazing time. You can love whoever and be whoever you want. And again, that's maybe true where he exists and in the circles he rolls in, but worldwide, especially, that is not true. And if you're arguing to uphold a government in a place where there are those types of moral and not just moral things, but legal imposition, I think,
dude, yeah, I feel
we've
like
come a long way since I was a kid to just
he meets
finally get off
Midas.
myself. We've legalized marijuana and gay marriage in America, kind of. And we're, even 50 years from now, we're going to look back as this was the era when that transition happened.
I feel like we did the
stigmatized.
opposite, actually. Like, here's my take on the gay marriage thing. So we have this idea of a marriage, right? Which is like a religious organization demands that you follow their rules. If you've ever seen a Catholic marriage, they make you go to like classes before you get married. They do blood tests in California. Marriages are weird, okay? And then you say, okay, we don't need you to get married because that's a religious thing. That's some weird occult mumbo jumbo. If you want to get married, you can do your little party. What we do is the same as the French. We have a social thing. The Soviets, the Bolsheviks, they all have the same agreement. It's called a civil union. A marriage is a civil union. You had a cool relationship. You have a spiritual connection. You have a church involved. That's fine.
But you get a tax break
for the state. Do you get a tax break or do you not?
And if one person serves in the military and dies, does the other person are they recognized as their spouse?
And there's not been any question
of that.
There's not been any question. The answer is yes, you do. Doesn't matter what gender you are. Doesn't matter if you're in love with the guy or not.
That's the only intersection of where government where does government care about whether or not marriages are legitimate or not? It's in the eyes of the IRS, apparently.
Yeah, and guess how long back that goes, by the way? Like the Athenians. We're talking about the Spartan law at that point. Like if you've got someone that you're taking care of, that you have an obligation for, this isn't homosexuality. This is the Chewbacca Wookiee life pact. Like if you owe someone something, like taking care of them, that goes back thousands of years. Has nothing to do with erotic Greek love. That's one of the kinds of love. There's many kinds of love. You can love people, any kind of people, based on all sorts of out of respect, out of relationship from genetic relationship or familial relationship and contact, out of being part of the same collegiate circle. This is what the Oddfellows do. So the idea of marriage is also really weird, like because we think that marriage is this Catholic thing, which is convoluted. It's this Catholic thing is you're going to make babies for the Catholic Church. Right, you're gonna do it like that's not exactly what people think of when they're saying a marriage anymore. So
because outside of reproduction and household, nesting behavior and raising a brood, there's the concept of sharing and communal resources and growing up the Green Brotherhood. The idea that even if one friend couldn't match down on the joint or on the bowl that you guys were smoking, that they still get included in the circle unless you're like really trying to make a point about it. And so, it's everything I really need to know. I learned in kindergarten how to share. The question is that reinforced in adulthood? And it could be seen as deleterious behavior or
they're just different things. So like the Mormons are all about you getting married so you can have babies, right? And so like that's a celebration in their own church, and you can't really vote in the country about what people do in a Straw Hat Pizza establishment or in a pool, like a kids pool company, or at a cake store, or in a religious temple. Like these are things that are just, that has nothing to do with that. But you can say that people have the same rights across the board to tax breaks and to these economic civil unions and everything like that. And if people want to, they can have whatever religious ceremonies that they are allowed to or create themselves. But that's not the same as trying to force these small groups to have to do the same things. And this is really weird because by saying that the state has by people voting on the rights of people to get married, what they're saying is that the state has a right to say who gets married, which didn't exist before. There was no precedent because a marriage is a church thing. So we had a separation of church and state. But now what we're saying is that the state can get involved with marriage. And each thing that we decide the state can get involved with is something that they will, and they'll probably control.
Was it King Henry VIII who like beheaded a few of his wives? And
there was no way that have done that, by the way.
There was no way to end a marriage. So imagine coming from a society and culture that was just about spirituality and promotion of life
and too.
Raising of all the rising tide lifts all ships, and then you come across these weird backwards medieval people where even their king, there's like marriage should be illegal in. It's like even the concept that that's the one thing you're fighting for or about. Marriage in and of itself is a rather strange concept because there's an altruism to it. And usually that's not aligned with survival of the fittest or...
well, it depends. I mean, not necessarily. Like, look at Indian marriage. So often it's an arranged marriage that's decided when you're young by the parents that to say that you're of the same caste or class or something like that, and that you have a dowry, and it's set up so that they will proliferate the family lines. So your job will be to have children and to raise them.
So the men are sperm donors, and then they can go do whatever they want. And then like what's I don't know. Women in nature would have more integral function and
but it works, right? Like, look at like, is India working?
I mean, there's a lot of them, aren't there?
That's true too. But there's also
a lot of us, a lot of humans there.
The idea that India has sustained itself for thousands and thousands of years is pretty objective. They also have brahmachandras that don't. Right, there's a lot of people that will just dedicate their whole lives to serving God. Yeah.
Well, in that question, how are they doing over there? Yeah, it's like our population collapses unless we have huge infusions of refugees and orphans. And that's like historically the only way the United States exists. And the United States were raised to be so naive that we accept a 250-year version of our history, and we turn on blinders when we go to other cultures and they're talking about thousands of years, and then like Darwin comes along and like distracts everyone with his hundreds of thousands and millions of years scale timeline with evolution. But no, 250 years, it makes zero sense. So what was America before that? What did people say about it? And that's where Mormonism comes and gets this west coast to east coast settlement of the Kensington runestones. The question is that we have here on the east coast, the ivory towers, is did they come down through Canada and through the river and plant the stone there? And the question is, how did they learn the writing? And the Phoenicians might have come over, the Spanish came to the west coast with the Chinese as well, and the Portuguese had more of the Atlantic Ocean covered. But
we'll definitely do a video on this.
In this whole just to bring it back to Tartaria again, there's a rumor that there was this like whole big place that was like really complicated and had its roots out to everywhere in the world, and they had this advanced technology and they could like fly. They didn't even like really need roads and stuff, and it's like maybe America was like Tartaria, and like that's what it's very, I'm almost saying it in this frustrated way, because I myself, it took me a while to kind of realize that the story that's being told is one and of the same. Our baby country of 250 years old was done after a reset, and it was so good that the word Tartaria was
brutally interesting.
There was no such thing as a map. Where we came from, it was all digital, right? You're going to draw a map of your homeland.
Check out the Western Sea interior. I do this a bunch, but I'll do it again just for a second. The Western Sea interior is interesting because the idea that there was a lot of water, Randall Carlson stuff, right in the middle there. And look at where it separates Utah, Nevada, Deseret, right, from what this other map shows. And this is the Heartland map, and it shows Zarahemla. So this idea that this is up here, this is where Nebraska, Missouri, Missouri is where they say the Garden of Eden was, which is interesting because it's like, what? Why in Missouri? That's like,
I ask you to pull up maps of something right now. You don't pull out a scroll on vellum that you've hand traced and used a compass to lay it, because again, if there was an advanced society, all the maps of Tartaria were digital and designed to burn as soon as the wrong person was looking at them, because we were a rumor.
But we
Didn't exist.
do have
Tartaria,
river lines. We can see ancient river lines, and we can see what the water systems used to look like with the Western Sea interior. Like, we know where there's salt flats, that is where there was salt water. So there's a lot of evidence for where the Western Sea, and the idea that we can handle it if we say it's a lot older than 10,000 years old, 20,000 years old, 100,000 years old. That's a way easier thing to deal with than admitting this was probably within the last few thousand years, or within the last 10,000 years, right? 10,000, 6,000, 2,000, that there's actually traces of wadis, or flowing gulfs and streams that trickle seasonally that continued on even in the last 1,000 years. That explains a lot about Louisiana. It also explains where beaver trapping, the desertification of the Midwest by the destruction of the beaver populations meant there was no more sustainable water, freshwater supply. So that made it impossible for water to flow from one source to another source, which was what was happening. Salt water was going from one area through fresh water going down. The other thing I was going to say really quickly was Brittany found this in the Canterbury Tales article, and it's talking about the pagans, Tartars, Muslims, and Jews in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And it's interesting because often when you see Tartars, it's conflated with Jews, right? Because you have this idea of the tabernacles, the Tartars tabernacle maps, which shows that they didn't have access to their temple. And so without the temple, they had to use these tents. And so tent poles, as I think it was it, who said that earlier? Somebody, if you say it, wave your hand. Someone said tent poles, and that was good. But you look at this idea of all over the map, there are tent poles. These are places that you can go to change money, to have sins forgiven, to clean karma through atonement rituals, and trade, right? And they're all over the place. So this is this idea. However, the idea that the Tartars were the Jews, and then this article saying that they're considered separate of the Jews, asks, who are they? Are they a kind of then Christian? Are we then saying these are the Christian Jews? Or this is the...
And are we accepting ZHU as an alternate spelling and way to refer to like the Zhu people from ancient Chinese societies, or the way that they record it? Is it a phonetic thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, often there's the Xin, right? Like when we think of China today, we think of the Chitao people. But look at this: cacao, Chichao, cacao, right?
I had a cat named Cacao once.
Yeah, and then when is this? This is right at the same Constantinian period. So there's something to be said about that, the end of the Han dynasty, because that's when people start associating Han with China more when they write in, but they're not originally considered Chinese, and they don't even end up being the monolithic Chinese until the 20th century. So that's kind of cool.
So it's interesting when you're selling either a product or professional services. One strategy of advertising to a group or to kind of market your services is to present a certain level of complexity, to the extent that the person kind of wants to tune out of what you're saying and say, no, you're right. I need to hire someone to do this, and I'm going to hire you to do it. And the realm I came from was like architectural specifications. It's a very technical thing with standards and warranties and, building codes and all that. But when it comes to the history, by the time you get to 5,000 years of history on any country, 250 years is kind of manageable. And even then we have the story of our own revolution and liberation from a colonial yoke, which may or may not have been a story given to us to imbue a certain sense of freedom within a population of, again, refugees and orphans, that America was kind of a lifeboat for all these other people to flee to from the systems of oppression from which they in which they grew, and perhaps grew in number to the extent where instead of fighting against the powers that be, they decided to relocate and resettle somewhere else. I heard that one strategy in Palestine or in Israel is to drive everyone to the sea and force them onto Navy boats. This has been done in the past, apparently, and as a way to just end the refugee crisis that's going on there. But these then have to relocate a lot of people. And again, the standard of care while they're in your custody is, I would imagine, rather high when it comes to international, when there are eyeballs on it from a variety of directions. If I couldn't help but steer the conversation into the ground at the end. Here,
Go ahead and steer. We got a few more minutes. Pick a
Feel
last couple
free.
conversations. You know, we got like one or two more things we can probably cover.
Right, make yourself unmarketable. Have an opinion about this, or either avoid the subject altogether, or you know.
Antique Roadshow is a conspiracy, right?
I used to love that show.
I mean, it's great. Yeah, the little
High
people
production
show
value.
up with their like little clock, and they're like, "Wow, did you know this clock belonged to like the Rockefellers?" And you're like, "Okay, well, who are you, lady? Why do you have
And
JP
they
Morgan's
maxed out the
Titanic
production
clock?"
value though. They like built a cliffhanger, and then it was like, this is worth, and then they'd cut to commercial to make sure you came back to watch the last 30 seconds of the appraisal or whatever. But yeah, I'm just brainstorming for the biggest poser, because you can turn like 20 minutes of actual content into a 40-minute episode if you need to, especially if you're inserting product placements and getting
Yeah,
testimonials.
it has to be like the Cable Guy, but about yoga. You know.
I mean, the Biggest Loser is, and you pretty much just copy the show and do the same exact thing, but you just have them, instead of doing cardio on machines only, you stitch a narrative that they're also doing yoga. And then you get some sort of international funding to promote yoga in America as, you know, a brand of healing, or I don't know, cultural appreciation or awareness.
Will, what are you drawing?
I am inking the first cover by Jack Kirby, which I think is like Avengers 164 or something like that.
So you're taking Jack Kirby's art and you're a tracer.
Well, basically, I took Jack Kirby's art and I put it into blue lines, and now I'm trying to learn how to ink, because it's like a completely different technique. But old school illustration was always turned into pen and ink. So
you're learning how to do proper like 1950s comic book inking so that you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
to
like
do things that don't have an undo button.
So you're basically doing like a Freemasonic ritual where you become Jack Kirby right now.
Well, have you made any mistakes is my question.
Oh, of course. I mean, like,
you're learning the
medium. What I've learned is, like, when you're inking something, it's not necessarily tracing, because there's going to be some sort of style that you impose on it. So it's like very abstract in the way of thinking, and it's all about the brush stroke. So like I'm doing it with the brush and not with a pen. And because of that, there can be, depending on how hard I push on the tip, a fat line or a skinny line. And so it's very meditative. I've actually found it was easy to listen to what you guys were saying while doing this, though. Like there's a little bit of like meditation involved.
I used to, in order to pay attention through, 5 different subjects by the time in high school, every single border of my notebooks is just covered with doodles. And I would even bring in music. I think it was like Wyclef's album that had a bunch of Creole. So I wasn't listening to English and then also trying to follow a lecture. But that was the only way I was able to kind of, I guess that's how I hacked my ADD in high school, because it was not diagnosed or anything.
Are you trying to learn how to be more like Jack Kirby, or like understand what Jack Kirby?
I'm just trying to learn how to ink, because it's something that I've never done. I'm a pretty good artist as far as like painting goes and drawing goes, but like recently I learned how to do spray can, because I never could afford spray cans when I was a kid. I thought it was like a kind of a hard thing to understand. And then I got like a VR headset and got a program that mimics the physics of spray cans, so I could just practice to my heart.
No way. That was it was like a flight simulator.
Yeah, except it has the physics. So that's like, but
yeah,
most of the art you make is kind of there's a perimeter in which medium you're using. So there's certain things you can do with an ink that you can't do with a pencil, and there's certain things you can do as a spray can. Like I never realized like a spray can, like I thought that you would have to do it perfect to get it right, and you don't, because the eraser is in the spray can. Does that make sense? So you can fix any of your mistakes easy. And it's a lot more difficult with the inking, because like you say, if you make a mistake, then you have to figure out some way how to, because it's an ink, you can't erase it. The only way to do it is basically to plop down. What they used to do is plop down whiteout. So if they made a mistake in one spot, they would white it out and then redo it. but with like I don't know. It's just
So you're
it's
saying
very
in the VR
interesting.
setup, though, it was a decent approximation of the actual physics of spray paintings to the extent where,
Yeah,
because I'm
the
envisioning like
cone
a
and the
contest.
angle.
You can
all
have
of
an
the
online contest, and you don't need a physical medium, and you don't need. It's the barrier of entry for some people is the price point because they don't have $50 to spend on spray paint every time they want to enter a competition. And you could have legitimate graffiti artists, and it's done by hand, in front of you. You're not worried that it was a piece of something that looks like graffiti art, but it's not really graffiti art. It was just done on a program. I mean, that's fascinating. That's an interesting. I appreciate you sharing that. I've never heard of that before.
I imagine that there'll be sort of like metaverses where, because there's already like it happens in Ready Player One where the individuals in the metaverse like make their old school childhood arcade or whatever. There's like a whole planet, but there's nothing but arcades. And I figure that sooner or later there'll be some sort of like nightclubs or something like that where people can put on their headset and go be in an open space. And I imagine sooner or later there'll be like live music, like a band could
Sure.
be VR headset.
Well,
and
We
you know,
used
it's
to
like
we used to do this
there could
back
be
in
an
2000.
artist in the background making a mural in spray paint on
In
a
2000 in 2008 we had all this VR stuff that was like pretty much exactly what's available now, but like it was only available kind of in a minor sense because you could do it like while looking at the screen. We didn't quite have the VR like headset aspect of it, but you could use like Wiimotes. You could in real-time space design 3D models, which you would look at. And now this stuff is everywhere. It's ubiquitous to the point that you can actually design in a 3D space. And yeah, the first things were being able to paint like this, that you could paint in this, and then you could walk around the 3D paint that's in midair without an actual canvas because you just sprayed it in the sky. So now you get a cloud of paint and you can circle around it, right?
As far as sponsoring online events where you get 10,000 people or 1,000 people even at once to sign into one interface to watch 5 artists, create something independently. And it's almost like a reality show style level of intrigue. It's the way Ink Master, it was exciting to watch people kind of go through their creative process and meet the client's needs or their own aesthetic design principles. And I don't know. That's pretty, because on one hand, people would gather around a ping pong competition. People gather for dodgeball. They have co-ed dodgeball leagues because people just want an excuse to gather and, do something that is somewhat trivial and interact with other humans in a non-emotionally charged environment, I guess.
okay,
but
look
that is
something up for
available
me,
digitally too. Go ahead.
because it kind of goes. We've been hinting around this idea for a while, all night, but it's called TDCS, trans-dimensional cranium something.
Stimulation.
Boom. And a good way to look it up is something called the 9-volt Nirvana. But the TDCS machine is basically used TMS. That's different.
Transcendental meditate. I know
It's
transcranial.
TDCS with their 9-volt. Yeah, there we go. Right there. This is basically something used by DARPA to teach snipers how to become efficient snipers in like 700% quicker learning speeds.
Whoa.
Well, so another interesting piece of technology there, Andreas, have you heard of the open-sided MRI?
No.
And Will as well. Again, it's like the idea is that these things are supposed to be illegal, not because they're dangerous, but because like if the physics of that are really possible, then shit. Now you walk by a wall and somehow you no longer need to be aware that you're being surrounded by magnetic currents, the strength of which it's hard to really contemplate or imagine, but that are somehow useful to orient and not harmful as well to get imaging in the body. And then, there's an open-sided MRI now where basically instead of even walking by walking through a metal detector or you're going through an X-ray machine, apparently you just need to walk by an open-sided MRI and they can see like your heart beating,
Wow.
And what does it look like? I don't know what the inside of an open-sided MRI. I don't think it's one of these highly proprietary pieces of technology. You're muted, Andreas.
Apparently that was one right there. I don't know. So yeah,
It all has to do with flow states. Like learning a skill increases happiness. In fact, it can cure depression, but it all has to do with like becoming efficient or sufficient in a certain skill. And the TDCS kind of like blocks out if you read the book Flow States, it basically says that doubt and self-consciousness, they take up too much bandwidth. So it's hard for somebody to become good at something because they're taking up too much of the bandwidth to actually learn the skill, worrying about they're not good enough at the skill. And then what the TDCS will like take that out. That's why it helps with like depression and stuff of that nature, is it kind of like creates a more solid electrical current in your brain.
Because for some people, it's just a longer learning curve in those types of personal hangups or something, as you're saying, something that prevents them from focusing on the actual learning of the task itself. It's a long, but for other people, they'll never get over. It's like activation energy. And so for certain people, they may go in. I mean, certain self-administered shock therapy is a thing. And it kind of almost sounds like that's what it is. And usually, I mean, you can buy these things that'll zap your wrist.
Electroshock
tell you not to
therapy
put it on your neck.
The TDCS was probably the actual efficient aspect of what electroshock therapy was originally supposed to do, or it did. I mean, electroshock therapy had results. That's why they used it. It's just on whether or not
bath salts, it's like,
yeah. I mean, on whether or not
people kind of end up like this. It was good for me. I'm like pretty sure
only after 2010
and stuff. Because if I say it's not good for me, then they'll kick me out of the hospital, and I'm pretty sure. Yikes.
Well, I mean, it's the same idea. There's got to be some sort of misfire on their part, because now you have a smaller version. The TDCS has about maybe the exact wattage of a 9-volt battery. That's why it's associated with that one article called 9-volt Nirvana. But
in Mexico, the kids games, they zap each other as part of like card games, and if you lose, like you have to like each round they turn up the dial and they experiment a lot more with the safety regulations of things released in the United States are a little more stringent. But
kids don't lick the back of disposable cans.
In the 1700s in Massachusetts, there were certain doctors that were famous for getting great results for their patients, but before they accepted a patient, they had to, for 3 months, only eat the diet that the doctor prescribed to them, get all the exercise in, and they had to not drink, not smoke, all these things. And so in order to be accepted into their care, you had to kind of pre-qualify. And then once you were there, you were perhaps had access to the types of treatment or wellness ensuring medicine that guy had to offer. But in a psychiatric setting, if the prerequisite for being under the care of the head doctor is that you have to accept shock therapy for the child and or yourself, or is
that the final word?
Yeah. What do you got? Make everyone, including myself, uncomfortable.
What's the final word?
Shocking children with electricity. And again, it's the worst cases. No one wants to think about these things.
It happens.
God bless Judge so-and-so, whoever the school's named after.
God bless Judge Judy.
I guess. or something like that. I don't know.
Will, you got a final word?
Yeah. Check me and David out on Tuesday. Go back and watch Frank Zero on I guess that's what we're doing. I'm promoting myself. So go back and watch Frank Zero and I talk about shape-shifting reptiles, because it goes along with what we talked about tonight.
I think it's worth it.
And tune into David Plate and Meta Egg.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, sir.
Biggest Poser will be back with us soon. Any more thoughts you wanted to share?
I hope so. Pre-planned C-sections are a thing, and you should look into it.
For geriatric pregnancies, most of the time, not for others.
And geriatric means over 35, because I think it's like meant to make women insecure about the number of eggs they have left in their ovaries. But the
Yeah,
oldest
so
woman
you do it when you're a
who
teenager.
to give
like-
birth lately was a 67-year-old Chinese woman. I'm just trying to just
my
putting it
my
out there.
final word is drink mineral water.
Imagine two 60-year-olds getting married with the idea of bringing a family into the world. Imagine that.
Cloning is going to be cool. Drink lots and lots of mineral water.
Advanced philosophy memes.